אחים גם יחד, הנה מה טוב ומה לא טוב. יי לי 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 לי, הנה מה טוב, הנה מה טוב. לי 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 לי, הנה מה טוב ומה נעים, שבת אחים גם יחד, הנה מה טוב ומה נעים, שבת אחים גם יחד.
Shabbat Shalom, everyone. This is the call and response portion of the evening. Shabbat Shalom, everyone.
Shabbat Shalom.
It's lovely to see you. I'm Rabbi Fixler. I'm one of the rabbis here at Congregation Emanu, and I am thrilled to get to spend Shabbat with you, to get to spend Shabbat with Riley and Jacob and their families as we celebrate this moment of becoming for them. I want to encourage people that we don't charge extra for the seats in the front, just so you know. So, and the experience is much better when you're closer. So I want to encourage people, if they want to come move closer, you can do it, it's okay. Anyone? Any takers? Who's brave? Some people I think, yeah, all right, awesome, fantastic. And we are going to spend this evening and tomorrow morning praying together and learning together, singing together and growing together. Prayer is different than theater. It is meant to be experienced and participated in. We're going to do our best to lead you in song and prayer and keep you posted on where we are so that you can participate as much as you want. The prayer book for this evening is the blue prayer book that says Mishkan Tefillah, not the big red books. We'll be using those in the morning for something else, but the blue books. And every prayer, you will notice, is in both Hebrew and in transliterated Hebrew written in English characters so that you can follow along. And also, every prayer is translated below, sometimes directly and sometimes more interpretively. So, like I said, we'll do our best to keep you on the same page. And in that, on that note, we are going to turn now to page 20. For Lecha Dodi, page 20. Lecha Dodi is our prayer where we welcome the Sabbath bride. We think of Shabbat as being like a bride, and the Jewish people get to get married to Shabbat every week. So this is our wedding ceremony. The way the wedding ceremony works is as follows. We are going to sing the chorus, which is at the top of page 20, along with verses 1, 2, 5, and 9, because those are my favorites. And when we get to verse 9, we're going to rise, we're going to turn and face the back door, we're going to imagine the Shabbat bride entering the room, and on the very last words, Boi Kala, we're going to bow 3 times towards the door. That's the moment the Sabbath enters our lives. So when we get to verse 9, I'll signal to you to rise, we'll turn and face that door. It's easier than it sounds, I promise. Lecha Dodi, page 20.
Lecha Dodi likrat kala, b'nei Shabbat nekabela. Lecha Dodi likrat kala, b'nei Shabbat nekabela. Lecha Dodi likrat Kabbalat Shabbat, b'nei Shabbat nekabela. Lecha Dodi likrat kala, b'nei Shabbat nekabela. Shamor v'tzachor b'dibur echad, השמיענו אל המיוחד, אדוני אחד ושמו אחד, שמו תפארת ונתינה. לך דודי לקראת כלה, בני שבת נקבלה. לך דודי לקראת כלה, בני שבת נקבלה. לקראת שבת לחור ברכה, כי היא מקור הברכה, מארוש מקדם ניסוחה, סוף מעשה במחשבה תחילה. לך דודי לקראת כלה, בני שבת נקבלה. לך דודי לקראת כלה, בני שבת נקבלה.
Verse 5.
התעוררי, התעוררי, כי באורך מיורי, ובורי
Having welcomed now the Sabbath bride, we take a few moments to also greet each other. While you're still standing, introduce yourself to someone you don't know, wish them a Shabbat Shalom. This may involve moving from your spot.
Good Shabbat. Good Shabbat.
And you may be seated as you finish introducing yourselves to someone you don't know. Speaking of introductions, I want to welcome Anne Frobiter, who's our amazing pianist, and Alicia Chu, who's our curatorial soloist for the evening. We are thrilled to have them both lending their beautiful music to tonight's service. We are going to continue now with the lighting of the Sabbath candles, the readings for which can be found on page 2 and page 3. And we are going to invite up Katie and Ron and Heather and Spencer to lead us in the lighting of the Sabbath candles.
Our lives give light to all who behold us.
As their brightness reminds us of the generations of Israel who have kindled light, so may we, in our own day, be among those who kindle light.
O source of light and truth, creator of the eternal law of goodness, help us to find knowledge by which to live. Lead us to take the words we shall speak into our hearts and our lives. Bless all who enter the sanctuary in need, all who bring the offerings of their hearts. May our worship lead us to acts of kindness, peace, and love.
Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lahadlik ner shel Shabbat.
We continue on page 6.
Please read responsively. May the door of this synagogue be wide enough to receive all who hunger for love, all who are lonely for friendship.
My apologies. May it welcome all who cares to unburden, thanks to express, hopes to nurture.
May the door of this synagogue be narrow enough to shut out pettiness and pride, envy and enmity.
May its threshold be no stumbling block to young or straying feet.
May it be too high to admit complacency, selfishness, and harshness.
May this synagogue be, for all who enter, the doorway to a richer and more meaningful life.
Please turn to page 146 and write for the Baruch, page 146.
Please rise.
Baruch et Adonai HaMevorach Baruch Adonai HaMevorach HaMevorach Le'olam Va'ed HaMevorach
We continue reading together in the middle of page 147. Page 147. Adonai, your majesty is proclaimed by the marvels of the earth and sky. Sun, moon, and stars testify to your power and wisdom. Day follows day in endless succession, and the years vanish, but your sovereignty endures. Though all things pass, let not your glory depart from us. Help us to become co-workers with you and endow our fleeting days with abiding worth. Baruch atah Adonai hama'ariv aravim.
We continue responsively on the next page.
Responsively means you do the indented paragraphs.
In each age we receive and transmit Torah. At each moment we are addressed by the world.
In each age we are challenged by our ancient teaching. At each moment we stand face to face with truth.
In each age we add our wisdom to that which has gone before. At each moment the knowing heart is filled with wonder.
In each age the children of Torah become its builders and seek to set the world firm on a foundation of truth. Baruch atah Adonai ohev amo Yisrael.
Please be seated. V'ahavta et Adonai Elohecha b'chol avadecha u'b'chol nafshecha u'b'chol me'odecha v'hayu hadvarim ha'ele asher Anohi mitzavecha hayom al levavecha v'shinantam levanecha v'dibarta ba'am v'shivtecha b'beitecha uv'lechtecha b'derech uv'shokbecha uv'kumecha uv'shaltam leot al yedecha v'hayu letotafot b'neinecha uv'taktam al mizot beitecha uv'ishayecha Leman tizkeru v'asitem et kol mitzvotai v'hitem kedoshim le'Elohechem Ani Adonai Elohechem asher hotzeiti etchem me'eretz Mitzrayim lehiyot lachem Elohim Ani Adonai Elohechem. We continue responsively on page 151. We worship the power that unites the universe, a promise of harmony for all.
Yet that oneness eludes our grasp as imperfection and evil abound.
Before our eyes there is a vision of perfection, order, and goodness.
There is evil enough to break the heart, and there is good enough to exalt the soul.
When will redemption come?
When we
Grant everyone that we claim for ourselves.
Long ago we escaped the tyranny of Egypt. Our people saw the power of the Most High.
We learned God's presence redeems time and event, so we celebrate this power that makes for freedom. Our next prayer, which can be found on the next page, page 152, is called Mi Chamocha. It's actually a quote from the Torah, from the book of Exodus, that the people sang as they reached the edge of the sea, having crossed the sea into freedom and liberation. It says that Miriam, the prophetess, took her tambourine in her hand and she led all the men and women in dancing. And every year when we read those verses, I find it absolutely befuddling that people who are on their way to freedom, people who are escaping slavery, people who didn't even have enough time for their bread to rise, thought to pack tambourines. This is an absurd thought. What it says to me is this. First of all, it's a reminder that this is a joyful prayer, so we'll sing it joyfully, but also it's a reminder that you got to plan for joy. You got to be prepared to be happy. You got to look for opportunities in this world to find meaning, to find purpose, to find happiness and joy, because you never know when you're going to need your tambourine. We join together joyfully on page 152.
First part, you can join in on the ya-ya and ya-la-la-la-la-la-la-la-la, ya-la-la-la-la-la-la-la-la-la-la-la-la-la-la-la-la-la-la-la. With joy. Mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai, mi chamocha ne'ena b'kodesh, Torah tehilot osefele, Torah tehilot osefele. Malchut lecha u'panecha, ukeyayam lifnei Moshe, ze eli anu ve'amru, ze eli anu ve'amru, Adonai yimloch le'olam va'ed, Adonai yimloch le'olam va'ed. Everybody, ay, 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 lay, 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 lay. Come on, yeah, lay, 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 lay. Tambourines, lay, 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 lay. Yeah, lay, 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 lay.
We continue together on the bottom of page 153.
Give us a place to rest, O God. You said together. Shelter us in the long, soft evening shadow of your truth. You are true protection and safety. In your presence we find love and acceptance. Watch over us as we go forth. Prepare for us as we return. Spread over us your shelter of peace over all we love, over our Jerusalem and yours. Baruch atah Adonai, haporei sukat shalom aleinu ve'al kol amo Yisrael ve'al Yerushalayim. We continue on page 154 as we celebrate the gift of Shabbat with the words of Vishamru.
Vishamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat, la'asot et ha-Shabbat לדורותם ברית עולם. Vishamru b'nei Yisrael et ha-Shabbat, la'asot et ha-Shabbat לדורותם ברית עולם. ביני ובין Israel, oti leolam, ve'shamru b'nei Israel et ha-Shabbat, la'asot et ha-Shabbat לדורותם ברית עולם. כי ששת ימים עשה אדוני את השמיים ואת הארץ, ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם. וביום השביעי שבת וינפש, שבת וינפש, שבת וינפש. ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית עולם. ושמרו בני ישראל את השבת, לעשות את השבת לדורותם ברית
Our service continues on pages 155 and 156. Please rise. Adonai sefer titaf ufi yagi tehilotecha. Adonai, open up my lips that my mouth may declare your praise. Baruch atah Adonai, Eloheinu, Elohei Avotenu v'Imotenu, Elohei Abraham, Elohei Yitzhak, Elohei Yaakov, Elohei Sarah, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Rachel, Elohei Leah, Ha'el Hagadol, Hagibor v'Hanara, El Elyon, Gomel Hasadim Tovim, V'konei Hakol, V'zocher Chasdei Avot v'Imahot, U'mevi Geula Livnei V'neihem, L'man Shemo Be'ahava, Melech Ozer U'Moshiach U'Magen, Baruch atah Adonai, Magen Avraham, V'Ezrat Sarah, Atah Gibor Le'olam Adonai, Mechayeh HaKol Atarav Le'Hoshia, Morid Hatal, Mechakel Hayim B'Chesed, Mechayeh HaKol B'Rachamim Rabim, Somech Milchim B'Rofei Holim, Umatir Asurim, Umekayem Emunato, Lishenei Afar, Michamocha Baal Gevurot, Umidomela, Melech Remit, Umechayeh, Umashniach Yeshua, V'ne'eman atah l'hayo ha'kol, Baruch atah Adonai, Mechayeh ha'kol. Atah kadosh v'shimcha kadosh, v'kedoshim b'chol yom yahalelucha selah. Baruch atah Adonai, ha'el ha'kadosh. Please be seated. We continue together in the middle of page 160. May these hours of rest and renewal open our hearts to joy and our minds to truth. May all who struggle find rest on this day. May all who suffer find solace. May all who hurt find healing on this day. May all who despair find purpose. May all who hunger find fulfillment on this day. And may we all live in such a way that this day fulfill its promise. Baruch atah Adonai, Mekadesh HaShabbat. Be gracious, Adonai our God, to your people, Israel, and receive our prayers with love. O may our worship always be acceptable to you. Fill us with the knowledge that you are near to all who seek you in truth. Let our eyes behold your presence in our midst and in the midst of our people in Zion. Blessed is Adonai, whose presence renews Zion. Baruch atah Adonai, Hamahazir, Shehinato, Litzion.
Amen.
Modim anachnu la, she'atah hu Adonai Eloheinu, ve'Elohei avotenu v'imotenu, le'olam ba'ed. Sur hayenu magen yishenu, atah hu le'odor v'dor. For the good in us which calls us to a better life, we give thanks.
For the strength to improve the world with our hearts and our hands, we offer praise.
For the desire in us which leads us to work for peace, we are grateful.
For life and nature, harmony and beauty, for the hope of tomorrow, all praise to the source of being.
For all these things, O Sovereign, let your name be forever praised and blessed. O God, our Redeemer and Helper, let all who live affirm you and praise your name in truth. Blessed are you, Adonai. Your name is goodness, and you are worthy of thanksgiving.
Baruch atah Adonai, hatov shimcha u'lecha ne'ech u'hodot. We take a few moments now for silent prayer and meditation. If you can't think of anything to say in these quiet moments, I encourage you to make a list of 5 things you're grateful for today. I promise it will change your life. We continue with Shalom Rav, a prayer for peace, on page 164.
Shalom Rav al Yisrael Amcha Tasim Leolam. Shalom Rav al Yisrael Amcha Tasim Leolam. Ki atohu melech adon lechol hashalom. Ki atohu melech adon lechol hashalom. Shalom rav al Yisrael amcha tasim leolam. Shalom rav al Yisrael amcha tasim leolam. וטוב בעיניך לברך את עמך ישראל בכל עת ובכל שעה בשלומך. שלום רב על ישראל עמך תשים לעולם. Shalom Rav al Yisrael Amcha Tasim Leolam. Tasim Leolam. Tasim Leolam.
Next prayer in our service is a prayer for healing, a prayer called Misha Berach, which can be found on page 253. Page 253. It's a powerful thing to pray for healing, not only because we do believe that miracles can happen, but because we believe in prayer's power to change our own hearts. In a moment, I'm going to read a list of people in our own synagogue community who are in need of healing. Then I'm going to invite you to add to that list names of people in your own life who are in need of healing. And I hope that after this service, you let them know in some way that you were thinking of them. Give them a call. Maybe you haven't called them in a while. Maybe you already called them today and they get a second bonus call from you. Both are great. Sometimes suffering can be hardest because it's invisible. And this prayer for healing is powerful because it's a reminder to all of us to make it more visible, to call not just to God, but also to call to the people we love and care about who are in need of healing. In our synagogue community, we're thinking this Shabbat of Marty Block, Bradley Borden, Richard Brown, Melba Berman, Richard Kaplan, Sidney Kovan, Marilyn Datz, Debbie Davey, Tom Unger, Alan Garber, Susan Garber, Marcine Goldman, Judy Gorowitz, Jacqueline Gutierrez, Sarah James, Sandra Jones, Beverly Kovnat, Doug Crone, Ronnie Light, David McCarville, Judy Mendelovitz, Christina Michael, Sylvia Mintzer, Irvin Reiner, Liba Reisman, Gail Rockoff, Flo Selber, Stephen Smith, Denham Turner, Roger Williams, Lynn Zimmerman, Eddie Zisman, Yisrael Moshe Ben Rutamasha, and Yosefa Bat Esther. If there are other people who you're thinking about this Shabbat, before you call them, in this moment I invite you to share their names with our community as my eyes meet yours.
courage to make our lives a blessing, and let us say, Amen. Mishemera himotenu bekor habracha leavotenu. Bless those in need of healing with refuah shlema, the renewal of body, the renewal of spirit, and let us say, Amen.
A few brief announcements and then some words of Torah. We invite you to please remain with us at the end of services so that we can say Kiddush and Motzi together as a community. This week's challah and wine are provided by the Bronicky and Green families in honor of their sons' B'nai Mitzvah. There will also be more challah and wine after we say the blessings and sing our concluding song and do our closing blessing out in the lobby, so we invite you to join us for that. If you had an opportunity to grab a Shabbat handout on your way in, you'll notice that there are a ton of really exciting and wonderful programs happening in the congregation. I invite you to peruse that at your leisure. I would point out in particular that Leadership Shabbat honoring the leadership of our congregation and our new board and outgoing board will be Friday, May 4th at 6 p.m. And also our Congregant of the Year sign-up has begun. You don't get to sign up to be the Congregant of the Year. We already know that that's Diane Pouchette, but you get to sign up to come and help out with that reception. So we would love, if you are a member of our community, for us to join us. If you are new to our community, I'd invite you, please, after services, to come introduce yourself. We are thrilled that you are here. And now, a few words of Torah. Craig Tuchek has a plan to transform the city of Pittsburgh while at the same time honoring one of its most famous sons. For over a year, Craig has been conducting a campaign to make the official city song, Won't You Be My Neighbor, the theme song from Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. Pittsburgh takes great pride in Fred Rogers' connection to his hometown, and Craig imagines a day when It's a Beautiful Day in the Neighborhood is sung at all city council meetings and professional sporting events. Craig has explained his campaign, saying the lyrics are inspirational and the song is an important part of Pittsburgh history and culture. The message that Mr. Rogers tried to send is important and could hopefully foster some neighborliness in our city. Like Craig, I grew up on episodes of Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood. I got teary today listening to the kind, gentle voice saying, would you be mine? Could you be mine? Won't you be my neighbor? And that anthem seems more important now than maybe ever before. We live in a time when it's hard to be a neighbor. I, too, am nostalgic for those beautiful days of neighborliness, even if they were idealized even then. Craig has been hanging posters around town to build support for his cause. One of them reads, "Be the neighbor Mr. Rogers would want you to be." It's a message people need to see, especially in 2018. And I think the message is a modern version of a commandment that appears in this week's Torah portion, Achremot Kiddoshim. Ve'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, love your neighbor as yourself. It is perhaps the most famous of all the commandments in the Torah, and maybe when you think about it, also the most difficult. It seems so simple on its face, just 3 little words, and yet the more we stare at them, the more questions they raise. Who is your neighbor? And how much do you have to love them really? Do you really have to care for their well-being as much as you care for your own? And perhaps most troubling of all, can we even be commanded to love? God can place obligations on our actions, but does God have any jurisdiction over our hearts and our minds? This is not just a modern quandary. Jews throughout the generations have struggled to understand this commandment, its meaning, and its boundaries. This tension is seen in the statement of Rabbi Hillel, who lived nearly 2,000 years ago and restated this commandment as, "What is hateful to you, do not do to another." Here he takes the commandment out of the realm of emotion and reframes it in terms of action. You must treat others the way you want to be treated. But to Hillel, how you feel about them is another story altogether and your business alone. The tradition acknowledges that your own life and needs will be more valuable to you than the needs of your neighbor. Rabbi Akiva, writing around the same time as Rabbi Hillel, reflects that your life would surely take precedence over your fellow. So how then are we to make sense of love your neighbor as yourself? Could it ever really be possible to live this maxim fully, to be as interested in the needs of others as we are in our own? There is another version of this commandment, just a few verses later, that may shed some light on this challenge. "The stranger who resides in your land, you shall not wrong him. He shall be to you as one of your citizens. You shall love him as yourself, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt." At first, this seems even more challenging. Not only are we to love our neighbors, but also the stranger who is residing in our midst. And furthermore, we should see them as being the same as our own citizens. How would that even be possible? But then we are reminded that we were strangers once too, in the land of Egypt. And suddenly we are looking at the strangers in our midst differently. We are imagining ourselves in their shoes, and then it's harder to look away. Bible scholar Jacqueline Lapsey explains Israel is reminded what being a stranger feels like, and is then to ascribe those feelings to them imaginatively to the stranger. This act of emotional imagination will stir feelings of compassion. Out of this affective response will arise a love for the stranger, which takes form in practical action. I love this phrase, emotional imagination, because this process is rooted in story and creativity. We pass the homeless person on the street, and we don't just think about their cardboard sign or their tattered clothing. We try to imagine the story that led them to this moment. Are the hardships they faced anything like the hardships we've faced? Where do our stories diverge? Thinking in this way might change how we see them. We don't have to be right in our imagining either, because there is power in the imaginative process. When we put our suffering in conversation with theirs, we stretch our heart muscles a little bit. And when those muscles expand, there is a little more room in our heart. And when we are holding space for them in our hearts, we will treat them differently. Empathetic thinking leads to kinder, more loving actions. In this way, we stop seeing the people around us as strangers and start seeing them as re'echa, as our neighbors. And when we can imagine them with empathy, we can start to love them. Educational theorist Sir Ken Robinson says that imagination is one of the key elements of being human, that thing that separates us from the rest of the animal kingdom. The ability to creatively imagine someone else's story is the defining characteristic of our humanity. Perhaps this is what Genesis means when it says that God created human beings, B'Tselem Elohim, in the divine image. God, the ultimate creator, endowed us with a portion of that creativity, and we can learn to recognize that spark in others too. When we think of the commandment, Ve'ahavta l're'echa kamocha, love your neighbor as yourself, we tend to get hung up on the complexities of the first word, Ve'ahavta, love. But maybe we should shift our attention to the last word, kamocha, as yourself. We know ourselves to be complex beings made up of a myriad of stories. Can we employ our imagination to extend that same honor to other people, to imagine them complexly? Can we picture pieces of our own stories in theirs? And will doing this change how we feel about them? Can we really hate someone after having imagined them in this way? Literature scholar Elaine Scarry says that the human capacity to injure other people is very great precisely because our capacity to imagine others is very small. Our work, the work of faith, is to try and stretch that imaginative capacity. This kind of imagining can help us to act with more kindness and more justice. Peter Salovey, a psychologist and president of Yale University, has explained that psychologists have linked empathy to acting ethically and morally. We are more likely to treat other people well if we can find ways to empathize with them. Here we are told how to act, how not to mistreat strangers because we can understand their feelings, their hearts. Rabbi Emanuel Rackman has called this empathetic justice, a moral posture to the world that is rooted in our emotional imagination. And boy, do we need empathetic justice today. We are living in a world where it is getting harder and harder to imagine our neighbors. Globalization has shattered the barriers between communities. Neighborhoods now transcend ethnic, religious, even national boundaries. Our challenges with what to do about civil discourse, immigration, and conflicts all over the world are rooted in the strength and openness of our heart muscles, in our ability to imagine strangers and our neighbors complexly. Will emotional imagination instantly solve the Israeli-Palestinian conflict or the global refugee crisis? Absolutely not. But what I know is this: we cannot solve these crises without them. While it is true that imagination is a divine human gift, it is also true that human beings are not, by our nature, great at expanding our definitions of neighbors. Science understands this. Our monkey brains want to be in tribes, want to preserve ourselves and extend our genetic line, but not much more. Jewish tradition understands this too. Nachmanides writes in the 13th century that we will naturally wish for our neighbors a portion smaller than the one we wish for ourselves. Even our closest friends will come in second to our own desires. But this is exactly why we need this commandment. We are told 36 times in the Torah to care for the stranger because we need the reminder. We have to train ourselves to think this way, to exercise our emotional imagination, lest it atrophy. The religious project is to transcend our monkey brains and live generously in complex society, to put our divine creativity to work for humanity. So maybe Mr. Rogers' vision of a neighborhood with only beautiful days seems particularly far off at this moment. Maybe the discord between political parties has made us distrustful of our neighbors. Maybe world events trouble us and make us fearful. And fear is the opposite of love. It hardens our hearts. But we know that we are commanded to try and transform that fear back into love. We are commanded to let our hearts open so that they can shape our actions. That poster that Craig Tuchek has been hanging around Pittsburgh, the one with the message, "Be the neighbor Mr. Rogers wants you to be," has an image on it of two men sitting with their pant legs rolled up, their feet in a kiddie pool. One is Mr. Rogers. The other is Officer Clemens, the black gay police officer of Mr. Rogers' neighborhood. Francois Clemens, who played the character for 30 years, once recounted his experience of coming to the show. When Fred asked me to play a police officer, I said, "Fred, are you sure? Do you know what police officers represent in the community where I was raised?" And then he started talking about children needing helpers and the positive influence I could have for young children. My heart opened as I listened to him. Clemens recounted that Rogers was on the front lines of integration. He was one of the first black recurring characters on children's television, and that pool scene from 1969 made big waves in its day, if you'll forgive the pun. As Officer Clemens and Mr. Rogers sat in that integrated tiny pool together, they sang, "There are many ways to say I love you." Today, the image is hanging in posters all over a town where racial tensions are once again on the rise. The goal is to open hearts and minds, The goal is to inspire people to see themselves in their neighbors. The goal is to encourage a new generation to imagine empathetically. Mr. Rogers, in his theme song, says, "I have always wanted to have a neighbor just like you. I've always wanted to live in a neighborhood with you." This week's Torah portion challenges us to look at each person we meet with that kind of radical love. If we did, it might transform the world. Shabbat Shalom. We continue now with the prayer Aleinu L'Shabeach, which can be found on page 282 in your prayer book, page 282. I invite you please to rise as you are able as we open the doors of the Holy Ark.
לשבח לאדון הכל, לתת גדולה ליוצר בראשית, שלא אסר כגויי הארצות ולא שמנו כמשפחות האדמה, שלא שם חלקנו כהם וגורלנו ככל המונם. ואנחנו קוראים ומשתחווים ומודים לפני מלך מלכי המלכים הקדוש ברוך הוא. ונאמר והיה אדוני למלך על כל הארץ, ביום ההוא יהיה אדוני אחד, ושמו
We continue now in our service with a moment of sacred memory as we recall those we have loved who are no longer with us. There's a reading on page 290, which I love. It is a fearful thing to love what death can touch, a fearful thing to love, hope, dream, to be, and oh, to lose. A thing for fools this, and a holy thing to love. For your life has lived in me, your laugh once lifted me, your word was a gift to me. To remember this brings a painful joy. 'Tis a human thing to love, a holy thing to love, what death has touched. Our thoughts turn to those who have departed this earth, our own loved ones and those whom our friends and neighbors have lost, the martyrs of our people whose graves are unmarked, and those of every race and nation whose lives have been a blessing to humanity. As we remember them, we meditate on the meaning of love and loss, life and death. Our hearts go out in sympathy this week to the families of Elaine V. Plotkin, Royce Ann Sline, and Jerry Schwartz, who were laid to rest this past week. We also recall the yahrzeits, the yearly anniversaries of the deaths of Leo Aaron, Seymour Aronowitz, Sam Barvin, Regine Barbarian, Leslie Kahn Berman, Ike Breyer, Mary G. Brochstein, Bernard Cernonsky, Mortimer Cohen, Betty Ray Freed Cohen, Bruce Kaminsky, Gladys Dante, Meyer Davison, Samuel Solomon Davidson, Herman Jack Dolich, Marvin Eichenblatt, Rose Anish, Elise Schwartz-Fellman, Morton Fenberg, David A. Friedman, Evelyn Friedman, Faye Friedman, Howard Gary, Alan B. Gaylor, Annie Goldberg, Morris Samuel Goldberg, Max Goldman, Ernestine Goldstucker, Kaya Rachel Goodfriend, Bernard H. Goodman, Gregory Gordon, Janie Gordon, Sam Gordon, Fanny Hotchman, Elaine Kalin, Ruth Katz, Doris Goodman Katz, Paul Joseph Kaufman, Leonore Kessler, Alan J. Klein, Joan Lois Kosoy, Joseph Kroll, Cy Quarterler, Ann Laser, Joshua Lecht, Harry D. Leva, Charlotte Jacobs Levy, Florence Schwartz Littman, Flora Livingston, Frida S. Mann, Clarence Mayer Sr., Clara Mendel, Benjamin Mayer, Helen Miller, Stephen Miller, Norton Nelkin, Henry Nelkin, Ann Nelkin, Audrey Newman, Sylvia Oberstein, Grace Passon, Hans Polly, Abraham Posmantier, Nathan Prisnat, Presant, Doris Presant, Abraham Pye, Sylvia Aronson Rady, Eugene Asa Remmels, Ann Bell McCaslin Rhodes, Ethel Rose, Lottie Schindler, Anna Schub, Naomi Schwartz, Lily S. Siegel, Mona Shackbot, Milton Shackett, Isidore Joseph Shapiro, Harry Sherman, Frida Simon, C.J. Dolly Slavin, Irene Moselle Solomon, Jefferson D. Steinhardt, Kurt Stern, Jack Strauss, Loris Tota, Rita Rubin Turetsky, Alexander Vernick, Paul Warren, Louis Wilk, and Goldie Winter. If there are other people who you are calling this Shabbat, either because it is the anniversary of their death, because they've passed in recent days, or because you have them particularly on your mind this Sabbath, I invite you to share those names as my eyes meet yours. Words of Kaddish Yatom, the mourner's Kaddish, are found on page 294. For all those in our community who are remembering and for all those who have no one to say Kaddish for them, I invite you please to rise as you are able as one community for these sacred words. Yitkadal v'yitkadash shemei rabbah, be'alma tifrach yurtei ve'almich malchutei, B'chayechon uv'yomechon uv'chayei dechol Beit Yisrael, ba'gala uv'izman kariv v'imru amen, Yehei shmei rabba mevorach le'olam omea maya, Yitbarach v'yishtabach v'yitpa'ar v'yitchomam v'yitnaseh, v'yithadar v'yithaleh v'yithalal shmei dekudisha brichu, Le'ela mimkol birchata v'shirata, tushbechata v'nechemata, ta'amiran be'ama v'imru amen, Yehei Shlama Rabba Min Shemaya, V'chayim Aleinu Ve'al Kol Yisrael V'imru Amen. Osei Shalom Bimromav, Huya Asei Shalom, Aleinu Ve'al Kol Yisrael V'imru Amen.
Osei Shalom Bimromav, Huya Asei Shalom, Aleinu Ve'al Kol Israel ve'imeru. Amen.
I invite you please to be seated as we invite up Riley and Jacob and their sisters Abby and Cammie to lead us in the blessings over the wine and challah, which can be found on page 200, and that's not the right page. That they've given me on page 302, it looks like, I hope. Fingers crossed. No, that's not the right page. Okay. This.
melech haolam, moreh pori hagafen. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kishanu b'mitzvotav v'tzavanu. V'shabbat kodsho v'ahavat u'ratzon min halanu. Zikaron ma'aseh Bereshit, ki hu yom tehillah lemikra kodesh. Zecher l'tziah Mitzrayim, ki banu b'charta v'otanu kidashta mikol ha'amim. V'shabbat kodshecha v'ahavat ratzon ki naltanu. Baruch atah Adonai Mekadesh Hashem. Amen.
The poor mitzvah board first. You did this already. Okay, now you can. The people a little impressed. All right. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, motzi lechem min haaretz. Amen. Take a little piece of challah. Our closing song this evening can be found on page 322 in Kelohenu.
Ein Kelohenu, ein Kadonenu, ein Kemalkenu, ein Kemoshienu, mich Elohenu, mich Adonenu, mich Kemalkenu, mich Kemoshienu. Nodel Eloheinu, Nodel Adonenu, Nodel Malkeinu, Nodel Moshienu. Baruch Eloheinu, Baruch Adonenu, Baruch Malkeinu, Baruch Moshienu. Atahu Eloheinu, Atahu Adonenu, Atahu Malkeinu, Atahu Moshienu.
Please rise for the closing benediction. Source of life and blessing, we thank you for the God-given gift that is emotional imagination. We thank you for the blessing of love that fills our lives and stretches our hearts. We thank you for the opportunity to try and stretch our hearts a little farther, to open our arms a little bigger, to be a little more giving, a little more forgiving, a little more gracious in everything we do. We thank you for the incredible blessing of celebrating with these families on this Shabbat, and we wish you all a Shabbat Shalom, and we say together, Amen. We invite you to join us for challah and wine in the lobby, and we look forward to celebrating with you again at 10:30 in the morning.